Well, in the last video, we showed you how to cast on and crank the rows and do the color changes on the hat. And in this final video, we're going to show you how to bind off and finish the hat. So I have done the number of rows that I have scheduled to do in my pattern, and my first black needle has popped up, which is indicating to me that this is where I'm going to begin the binding off, since I started the cast on with a black needle as well. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to measure out about the same amount of yarn that we had in the beginning and dropped into the center. Drop that off. So I've got maybe 18 inches here, maybe a little more. And I'm going to thread a tapestry needle to bind off the hat. There is a tapestry needle that comes with the Addi, and those are very nice. I actually have a steel tapestry needle that I prefer. And so I have now threaded my yarn into my tapestry needle. I open the shuttle and remove the yarn, and then I close the shuttle immediately, because I've heard that the biggest reason that needles break is because the shuttle is open. And we are now going to start binding off. So I crank slowly, and my last stitch under a white needle gets down into the carriage, and you'll notice this first black needle is starting its downward descent. And when it gets all the way down, you'll sometimes hear an audible little click. I am going to scoop up that stitch that is on that needle. And I have now picked up the first stitch. And I will now just rotate the crank one stitch at a time. And as the needle goes down into the carriage, I will pick up the stitch that remains. If the stitch pops off of the needle, you can do what I just did and pull it back onto. And you can actually pick up several stitches at a time. You'll get very proficient doing it. And then just pull your tail through, and then shorten your tail. I'm just picking up those stitches. And notice I'm resting my hand right here on this nice little hand rest, which is a great little place for it. And it doesn't matter if you're left or right-handed, because there's only one way to do this. And again, I remember feeling pretty awkward the first few times I did it until I got the hang of it. That's okay, that's just part of the learning curve. It's really important that you pick up the entire stitch and you don't split your threads, for the same reason we talked about when you cast on. It was important not to split your threads. It won't gather properly if you've split any of your threads. Shorten my tail. Coming around to the end here. Do you hear that audible clicking sound every time the needle drops into the carriage? that's a good signal that it's okay to pick up that stitch. There is another method of binding off. This is a very simple bind off. You can do a crochet bind off. Now look, my last stitch there has come off of the bed of the machine, so I back it up and I just put it back on the bed of the machine so that the needle goes down and I can pick up that stitch. And now I have picked up all of the stitches and I can lift the hat out of the machine. And at this point, I'm going to unhook my machine from the table, set my clamps aside, put the machine somewhere else, and now we're going to finish the hat. You see, I've got a tube, and this is the outside of the tube. And here is the trailing thread where I ended, and here is the trailing thread where I started the cast on process. You want to get those two trailing threads on the same plane and then lay your hat out and make sure that you lay it out flat, get any wrinkles bumped out. And I like to work with the threads on the left. You might prefer to work with the threads on the right. Now remember, this is going to be a reversible hat, and so what I need to do is get the two unfinished edges together. And the way I do that is I actually put my arm into the hat and I grasp the center and I grasp my trailing threads and I pull them through the hat, just like that. Making sure that I'm keeping the center in the center. And so now here is my trailing thread and my two center parts. Those are going to be finished and become the top of the hat. The first thing I do is I'm going to gather the inside piece. Okay? I generally grasp the hat on both sides and then I gently start gathering. And I do that so that the gathers are even. I want to keep the centers together. And as you go, you may want to pull it so that your gathering yarn and your stitches are close to the top. And pretty soon, you will close up your circle and you'll have a nice, tight little circle there. Okay, and a big long trailing thread. So at this point I cut off and leave about that much. And I thread my tapestry needle. And when you thread yarn into a tapestry needle, you just kind of have to squash the yarn and work it through the head of the tapestry needle. Okay. So at this point, I want to do a couple of slip knot stitches, and I go from front to back and then make a slip knot and do it again and make a slip knot. Okay. Now, I leave that piece alone for a minute, and now I start working with the outside. And I do exactly the same process. I find the sides of the hat and I'm grasping it and I start gathering, making sure that I'm gathering evenly. Bringing my stitches to the top. And I want it to line up exactly with the thread from the other part. Close up my circle. Okay, so we've closed up our hole on this piece, and now we simply knot it. And you don't want to be too hard with your yarn, especially if it's fragile, because it might break and then you'd be in a pickle. The last part is now we are going to bury our tails. And to do that, we take our threaded yarn and we push it down through the center of the one side and make sure we come up through the center of the other side. Okay, and then we do exactly the same thing with this one. At this point I can cut off some of my yarn. Thread my needle. And again, down through the center of the hole, come out through the center on the other side. And again, I'm going to knot it. So we've triple knotted it on both sides. That knot is probably never going to untie. Now I just want to hide my tails. And the easiest way to do that is to go down through a stitch, and wherever I come out, go back in until I have buried those yarns deep into the hat between the two layers of the tube. I find this very relaxing. And sometimes I set the machine up next to my computer in the office, and I'll cast on and do a few rows. And throughout the day, when I have just 3 or 4 minutes, I'll crank several more rows. And by the end of the day, I've got a hat. And all I have to do is finish it. So I never even am really noticing the amount of time that it's taking. And there is my hat. And that's one aspect of it. Or if somebody wanted, isn't that beautiful? I'm telling you, I think alpaca breeders everywhere could really benefit from investing in this small machine and learning to do something with their yarns. It has been a very rewarding experience for me. My husband is very artistic, and I don't knit, I don't crochet, I don't do any of those crafty things. But now that I know how to make hats, I really feel like I have something to contribute to this alpaca farm. So if you're interested, give me a call on my cell phone, 509-378-6909. Send me an email. I'd love to talk with you about how to make these hats. Have some fun. Talk to you the next time. Goodbye from $10 Alpacas.